The Copts are indigenous Egyptian Christians, the vast majority belonging to the Coptic Orthodox Church. They live throughout Egypt but are concentrated in Alexandria, Cairo, and the urban areas of Upper Egypt. They represent between 6 and 9% of the total population, but their proportion is much higher in the south. However, when we look at the Coptics today, we see no distinction between them and Asiatic invaders. This is because the Coptic DNA has been extremely diluted with countless invaders for over 2,000 years. The Copts living in the Delta have always looked slightly different from Upper Egyptians. This is because the ancient Copts were a mixture between indigenous black Africans and ancient Middle Easterns that migrated into the Delta. Yet before the 13th century, the Coptic population still spoke an African language, derogatorily known as the Afro-Asiatic language. If you want to know more about why the Afro-Asiatic language is a misclassification, go back and check out my video, The Misclassification of the Afro-Asiatic Language. Furthermore, anthropologist Count Constantine visited Egypt in 1783, and this is what he said the Copts look like. They all have a bloated face, puffed up eyes, flat nose, thick lips, the true face of the mulatto. I was tempted to attribute it to the climate, but when I visited the Sphinx, its appearance gave me the key to the riddle. On seeing that head, typically Negro in all its features, I remember the remarkable passage where Herodotus says, "As for me, I judge the Colossians to be a colony of the ancient Egyptians, because like them, they are black with woolly hair." In other words, the ancient Egyptians were true Negroes of the same types as all native-born Africans. He goes on to say we can see how the blood mixed for several centuries with the Romans and Greeks. They must have lost the intensity of the original color. However, the Coptic people we see today had dark skin and looked more African thousands of years ago, and some still do today. Yet people with hidden agendas would never show images of much darker Copts. They do the same when showing the Phalan people of Upper Egypt. The typical Phalan are blacks and are more Negro-like. A famous German encyclopedia that was published in various editions from 1839 to 1984 called the Myers Conversation Lexicon. It included intel of people from different nations all around the world, displaying images of African peoples, Asiatic people, etc. It also included the Copts to be of the African nations, and this is how the encyclopedia depicted them. Obviously, somewhere in the distant past, the Copts had more African features. Even some modern Copts of today have admitted that their ancestors were black. We know this to be true because you will never find any primary evidence made by the ancient Egyptians themselves showing them looking like the modern Copts look today. The ancient Egyptians were highly advanced people, and they made a clear distinction between what they look like and what other people look like. Also, we'll never anytime soon get the original depiction of the four nations found in the tomb of Sesostris I, because it debunks all bigots with hidden agendas of Nubians and Sudanese people being at the bottom of civilization. But in Champollion the Younger's 13th letter to his brother, he describes the four nations to a T and was brutally honest of what he saw. Men led by Horus, the shepherd of the people, belong to four distinct families. The first one closest to the god has a dark red color, a well-proportioned body, kind face, nose slightly aquiline, long braided hair, and is dressed in white. The legends designate this species as the Egyptians. There can be no uncertainty about the racial identity of the man who comes next. He belongs to the black race, designated under the general term Nahisi. The third presents a very different aspect. His skin color borders on yellow or tan. He has strongly aquiline nose, thick black pointed beard, and wears a short garment of varied colors. These are called Namu. Finally, the last one in what we call flesh colored, a white skin of the most delicate shade, a nose straight or slightly arched, blue eyes, blonde or reddish beard, tall stature and very slender, dressed in a hairy ox skin and savage tattoos on various parts of his body. He is called Tamahu. The variations I observed fully convinced me that they try to represent here the inhabitants of the four corners of the earth. The one closest to Horus is the inhabitants of Egypt. The second is the inhabitants of Africa proper. Third, Asians. Finally, and I am ashamed to say so, since our race is the last of the most savage in the series, Europeans in those remote epochs frankly did not cut too fine a figure in the world. So based on Champollion's testimony, the Egyptians habitually represented themselves in a manner that could not possibly be confused by the white and yellow races of Europe and Asia. And the way the four races are constantly arranged in relations to the god Horus confirms the character of a social hierarchy. People with a racist ideology love to show these statues in a desperate attempt to prove a yellow or tan Egypt existed.
I got the perfect name for it. Super dummies.
But why can't they show one pharaoh depicted yellow or tan? If the Coptic people really are the descendants of the ancient Egyptians, then their ancestors had to have been black. There's no other way around it.